What doth life? No true words are been spoken, especially in this day and age. Hey everyone. Given what date this Easter falls upon, again, I'd like to do something a little bit different, and seeing as how adult swans may have named themselves almost in their willingness to experiment in comparison to other adult animation brands, the subject of today's video is easily the most gleefully mad experiment they've probably ever done, which is saying a lot. I mean, from the same people who gave us wonder shows and a really inappropriate, also hilarious subversion of Sesame Street, we have a show that bravely asks the question, what if Kane from Kung Fu or a band of the Incredible Hulk were complete buffoons, who's well intentioned and misguided at best, and causing more problems or making the ones worse at worst. So let's talk about Xavier Renegade Angel, whole Adult Swim's Absurdist CG cult classic. Though I'm not the first person to address this show by any means, as I mentioned before, that does not preclude me from taking a crack at it. I mean, as per usual, I try to make anything I say uniquely mine. And while some people just do an episode or two and say it's good enough for full view, I'm one person that does things differently. Whenever I review an entire show, I watch every episode in in many cases more than once. So I'm gonna go over each one and address what stood out at me, and especially it's highly possible that you might miss some bits on your first go round, and because there are just that many layers to this kind of offbeat comedy, and the elements actually complement each other, at least for the animation style, which has been compared to who who, who the video game Postal 2, and how it's absurd it is. It definitely looks like a PS2 machinima, and I will put spoiler alerts, warnings, and time codes you can avoid because there are big reveals in each season finale. So let's begin. The show's premise, again, much like the 70s Incredible Hulk and the original Kung Fu, among many others, hers is as follows. As Xavier attempts to find out who he is, as well as what happened to his parents, he wanders the country attempting to help others in need, and hilarity often ensues who's in the process. In fact, the very first episode, What Doth Life, establishes its quite kind of show is going to be right out of the gate as Xavier, voiced by series co-creator Vernon Chapman, and is stumbles upon Burberry, Connecticut, and his inner monologue is interrupted by a local lout throwing a liquor bottle at him and telling him to cease that inner yapping. And some of the quotes I am sharing are actually some of the most coherent ones, and they're also some of the most delicious servings of word salad, and some of those fruity kinds you probably ever tasted. I mean, that's another example how fast paced the jokes are. Like they stack on top of each other, and the character's inflections also add to this, especially in the case of how the dubbing is oftentimes like a YouTube poop, where no matter how many times or whoever ever ends up picking a fight with Xavier, it's always the same in takes of "take that, taste the pain," no matter who says it. Whether it's a diner patron and chef with some very casual kinks involving spanking, Hain, or a Neanderthal in the year here 86,000 BC and change, as well as 82 days. His main, including Xavier himself, his inflection is somewhere between a native mystic and a California surfer. So I would submit that no AI could ever cook up dialogue that made me laugh this hard. In fact, when some people took issue with the voice in Season 1, they responded making it sillier in Season 2. And there's also a great many examples of how it's an equal opportunity offender. And again, much like, say, South Park is, in order to make a non-anti-serious point about our day and age, and it balances out the social aspects with equal dose of absurdism, where these group of gangsters, they all secretly groom and train poodles. That's also a joke. It actually happens in the second episode, Chief Beef Loco, and one of their suppliers basically platinumed all his cells, turning him into the T-1000, and even dealing with him in some other way by tossing him in a conveniently placed vat of molten lead. So, and there's definitely one that can be certainly enhanced if you're so inclined, and especially given what day it is today. And it's also worth mentioning that the CG, even for the time of late 2000s, was a large part of the show's appeal, especially just how bizarre the looks, this mixture of mocap and the fact that it deliberately looks off. And that especially true of Xavier himself, who has, on top of like a blonde mullet, grown hair out all over his body, his legs bend backwards like an animal. He has a snake hand, which also becomes a character around the time of episode 4, the 6th. Has utter good intentions, paraphrasing there. He also has heterochromia in his eyes, kind of like Raven from Animal Crossing, and he also has like a third eye in between his legs. And that's just the stuff that stands out at me personally. And we also get some flashbacks to when he was learning the ways of the mystic, even though his mentor, her chief master guru, is clearly messing with him, which is definitely apparent in more than one instance. And one of my personal favorites being in episode 5, a pet suicide, and as I will explain, that episode ends up him trying to help a struggling pet store owner who also genetically he breeds his pets. It ends up being rented by an affluent and oil tycoon named Worthington and his spoiled son, and things just keep snowballing from there. As he actually manages to have like a role-playing game, and I'm not talking like World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy XIV either. He actually plays the part of the spoiled child really well, and when he ends up placing him in his stead, he ends up going like a 6-month vision quest to learn the concept of suffering and the idea of joy being experienced, creating equivalent pain elsewhere, is a sound one. As an FMA fan, I'm more familiar with the law of equivalent exchange, and much like matter, it cannot truly be created or destroyed. And in attempts to help his father turn a new leaf, they dose him with the blood of a native, which And his first thought is to open up a casino, which just crosses so many lines. It just wraps around to being entertaining, with I don't know about any bees, but I definitely can imagine I've sunk plenty of coin into Tekken 5 and House of Dead 4 Spirit Mountain in that time frame. And also, oh, the bottomless Pepsi products are definitely another boon, so let's continue. And now we come back to the episode I mentioned briefly, which has the aforementioned and kinky a diner patron and chef who are voiced by a the guest stars of, well, it's not entirely important, but the narrator suddenly he ends up being like the one on from Dukes of Hazzard with the basket of pain fries and archaeological dig, which has him as a cave drawing, and he somehow managed to unplug a portable television, and also the computer, which ends up being played by Junior Brown of They Might Be Giants and Spain, which actually kind of makes sense in a roundabout way. Hey, I mean, what do you do when you need information on a work of art or a place to eat? Why, you ask the internet, of course. And also, very bizarre method of time travel, all because about the amount of time it takes off your life for smoking and eating bacon. He ends up chain smoking, eating mass quantities of bacon in order to go back in time. And other ones are the other co-creators of the show: John Lee, Jim Tozy, and Ellison Levy. And here we are. And we also have among other ones, to add the absurdity, Vincent D'Onofrio, who as the judge, as well as the bit part of Eric, just shows a fantastic example of his range, not only in terms of dramatic, but also the comedic. And it's certainly a fascinating experience the more and more becomes apparent. And oh yes, it is also John Flansburgh, who, on top of being the computer, is also voicing in the aforementioned diner patrons. And it's just so much I can do about this one episode, but I must keep going. And another example is what comes after in Bloodcorn. So he ends up going to a part of the Midwest which is going through its own smaller scale Dust Bowl. So much that a farmer's daughter looks like a grandmother who's significantly older because of being how dried up everything is, the lack of rain. And the inciting incident is seen in the ad for the Maxi Bites factory, which makes both cookies and sanitary products. And one of my favorite permutations to cut out of pocket is at his showing up at the front gate is the company has a policy of not cutting the freaks on these parts, and in a roundabout way it ends up going almost full whole day of the Triffids, children of the corn, when he when the farmer shoots at the sky and it's still raining blood like the Slayer album, and only slightly more intense. I mean, yeah, it's out there here, and a lot of of Xavier's intends to help also end up inadvertently or temporarily causing like basically a class 3A apocalypse somehow. And the the story continues in episode 8, Escaping Squatopian Freedom, and which features the comic Speed Levitch as Pugler, the punk rock juggler, and him playing hot potato at the San Francisco Wharf. Ends up being him saying another memo quote that fire is freedom personified, and rather than pay rent for an apartment or house, he lives in a self-sustained anarchist commune where everyone sleeps on the same couches, uses the same fountain as a bathroom, and in order to make some pocket dollars, they end up selling their seed. I'm not sure or what I might do if I want to get the Switch 2 sooner, but it's definitely, I'm not sure to be this out there. And in order to get to Burning Man, or Burning Person as they call it in the show, needs to make some seed money, and which culminates in an actually kind of cute sea puppy, I'll admit. Yeah. I mean, to those of you who thought that Rick Dependent Spray had the most absurd use of that plot as a plot device, allow me to introduce you to this. And of course, the largest structure in the country is being set ablaze, and stuff gets getting tossed into an eco-friendly Stargate. We have the whole episode becoming like a star child with a spiked collar that you put on a dog, and also some brick joke about how it's certain mothers who, one might say, they know what they've done. The second to last episode of the first season, and Signs from Godrilla, involves a sign language gorilla who is not really a nice one like Coco was, but ultimately ends up being led astray and inadvertently making an evangelist cult based on increasingly flimsy justifications, and I'll admit the idea of presenting is not much of a stretch anymore. Or I especially also like little touches such as the deciding whether or not he should follow his heart or his head ends up taking so long that he ends up growing barnacles, holes, and moss, as well as having a bunch of posters and seagull droppings on him, even though it's only been in about the same runtime as the episode, what typically is, about 10 minutes and change. Yeah, it's kind of like that. And since I'm about to get in the first season of finale and the big reveal, put a time on the description if you want to skip past that part. So, Episode 10, the finale season 1, Shaka Shuri Blowdown. He does find out the truth about his father's killer, making the promise to kill the one who did it. However, as he finds out the hard way, through some very pushy cloud talk from his father's special essence, he was one who did it by inadvertently lighting too many candles in his place. This is something he cannot comprehend, which not only quite literally splits his mind's eye in half, but also his attempt to end it all with these certain vengeance razor blades. It does the deed. It is interrupted by two people in the same boxcar who don't really try and talk him down, but rather continue to keep badgering him, and which culminates in having him to taste the pain once more and use a blade to shave him with a mustache, but ends up finding numbers on his wrist as to mean Xavier, getting like a new lease on life, thinks of a phone number which leads him into the aforementioned Shaka Shuri Blowdown with his self, and the very back and forth quip, which is hilarious on its own, and just so many great lines from this, with my personal favorite being, "Look at you. You look so superficial, you probably judge things by physical appearance." I know a few people who could fit that description, and to think some people had a beef with Mufasa. Fair. Now, on to season 2 with Vibracast, man. And with him finding out the truth about his father's death, Xavier's next new quest, outside from him trying his best to help others but ends up being his own enemy as such, is finding out what happened to his mother, who he finds out via grave robbing is alive, and before that happens, he must deal with the couple of bereaved parents who lost their child in a car accident, and also he ends up having him take in a child who is clearly doing his best as version of Damien from the Omenverse, or even flipping the script on the usual dynamic between a boy and his priest. And yeah, it's definitely gonna get even more out there, and not just because of James' inflection. I also will note that most of the shows on YouTube, and the entirety is available on Adult Swim's website, so I want to thank them both for this one. Also, I will say that when I discovered it at one time, I like to say to myself, yeah, I can definitely say I know a guy on that one. Alright, so, continue moving right along. We have the Xavier's maneuver, and also another hint about his relationship with his mother, which, depending on yours or his even line of thinking, could be an exotic dancer with some very specific appeal, or just like someone whose relationship with him, let's just say, doing it along. He ends up crossing paths with a gangster named Dong Ho and an informant voiced by Bill Hader, her singing and dancing. It happened when he was a rookie. He just decided to roll with it after a while, and things only escalate from there. Now we come to one of my favorite episodes of the series, Free Range Manibalism, in which an attempt to visit the restroom of a local restaurant. He attempts to offer them a supply of meat, which is quite literally a burlap sack of roadkill. When the manager, her voiced by Heather Lawless, informs him there are higher standards, he is ejected and has a plan involving a couple drifters who's inhaling fumes outside the refuse bin. And the plan involves like a large supply of footballs from a sporting goods store, and disguise them as pigs. And naturally, it's also another running gag where a couple of Xavier's go-to foods apparently are grinder sandwiches and ice cream cones as well. And naturally, this escalates further into trying to uncover the surviving drifter's aura, who ends up getting into everything from smack, crim cram, Jiminy's, drumbles, and sci-fi. I mean, and like I said, this whole show may seem offensive on the surface, and I'm not gonna lie, if you're easily offended, this is definitely not your show for those who are weak in spirit or stomach. But for the people, it's definitely worthy of its status as a cult classic of sorts, where a social satire and critique which happens to star Snoop Dogg as a pimp per se, and Xavier, in order to infiltrate his business, puts on so many fake mustaches it turns into like a admittedly pretty impressive pimp coat. Yeah, it's kind of like that. It just gets crazy from there with the succeeding episodes, El Tornador, in which he ends up declaring war against Big Wind, and Haunted Tonk, where he finds out shelter home has become a roadside brothel catering to clientele with some very specific kinks. I mean, well, it was the late 2000s, and not everyone had their own ISP just yet, so what can you do? And amazingly, despite everything, ends up being a clue to finding out who and where his mother is, as shown by a flashback where she goes, "Honey, he found us again." And now we get to Damnesia Vu, in which it's Xavier ends up going into a journey to center of his mind, which, being the kind of person he is, especially with the reveal I'll be talking about the finale of the whole show, is very absurd. And among other stuff, he is sentenced to this journey by the judge, who, again, one of the aforementioned Mr. D'Onofrio guest appearances. And his misadventures include parallels to Lieutenant having him as inadvertently becoming like the second gunman on the grassy knoll, and also acting as somehow managing to turn her in a public menace, and that's with a bar cut to her head on himself. The next two episodes are definitely very interesting trips in the journey, where after inadvertently thawing out entire cryogenic research lab prematurely, he decides he's going normal, as in the episode's title, and ends up personifying the whole concept of failing upwards, or despite making increasingly out there comments that really don't have any pertain to his business, and yet somehow he's still more coherent than the current head of HHS, or at the very least, anyone currently in charge of Warner Bros. Discovery. And moving right along, we have Karma Bionic Lotion, and that's the best of my ability, and it's in the fictional town Lotion, New Mexico. Oh, and the experience starts out with him crashing a funeral of the town founder, prompting the people attending the gathering to bluntly point out, "We're in mourning, have some respect." And it escalates quickly into acting as theme park animatronics, which end up being sold to oil tycoons in the Mideast, and the show suddenly taking place in Australia at the end, and as Xavier Down Under. This is obviously before Zach Heddell and Michael Cusack started making stuff on the network, obviously. Yeah. So, for every Bluey that Australia's put out for cartoons, there's been a small name Friends. So, there's that. The penultimate episode, Damnesia U, is fittingly an episode made up of fan submissions and of which also uses the same framing device of Xavier's journey into his mind's eye. And the segments include ones made of live action and elements, ones made of puppetry. We have segments that are made up of Unreal Engine, which actually fits given the amount of people all who are compared to like a PlayStation cutscene. We have the also just a straight up one that looks like an Atari game from the 70s. And we also have a few segments that didn't make the cut but are also not hard to find online. Like I said to myself before, to y'all, I know a guy. Hey, it certainly is also, and also it culminates in notebook doodles and some trippy 66 animation, and now we get it to the finale of the second season, and my proxy of the series, Rangia's Final Cranny, and I'm going to be putting time in the description if you don't want to be spoiled, either in terms of plot or comedy. So, let's get to it. So, after his latest misadventure ends up inadvertently getting a person who was just going to be selling fish tacos on the beach hospitalized, and his dolphin costume getting messed up, though he mistakes a real dolphin. If you're going to slay an animal, they prepare to eat the whole thing. He ends up finding out where his mother is in a facility known as Macadamia Acres, and basically a literal nut house based on that naming convention. But as the episode goes on, especially as he's being analyzed by the facilities on Pavlov, again voiced by Bill Hader in the guest appearance. The whole truth comes out about not only the events of the episode, but basically the entire show. Oh, he was never disowned, owned, or even abandoned by his family. Turns out he was, to put it bluntly, a highly unstable, and everything he saw and did was in his mind's eye. Even the a symbol which flashes on screen and takes place as part of the show's logo appears during the Rorschach test as well. Which actually makes sense in a weird way to think about it, and actually, like other ones that come in rotation around this time of year, including The Big Lebowski being a big one, and it actually adds to the value of later viewings. So, while the show itself may have lasted only 2 seasons consisting of 20 episodes from 2007 to 2009, it definitely made an impact in that time frame, and naturally more people discovered over time. The character was even brought back in 2020 to give like a virtual commencement speech for that year's class of graduates, which, given the year that was actually quite fitting, much as now. Strange times call for strange entertainment, so to speak, and I can say, like a great many people, that this show left an impact on me, and I definitely can again respect the people for having again the plan to have they more or less knew what they wanted to do for the show and then set about doing it, which is suits me just fine. As I keep maintaining, not every show has to last for decades. It's in fact, it's kind of like something I've heard Hollop say. Good things last forever. I appreciate how precious they are. And with that in mind, I will definitely leave you to this and happy Easter or however else you want to celebrate today. Let's just say that some of the grass you might be touching might vary depending on your state of mind. Well, much like the man himself said, I will bid you all another. I better mosey on down. So, as he says with this catchphrase, frittata.